Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast number 143. This time we're continuing to cover some of the talks that were given at the recent Scottish Independence Convention. This particular talk was given by Richard Walker, a previous guest on the show. Richard is the editor of The National, Scotland's only independence-supporting newspaper. And in his talk he spoke about something that's guaranteed to get the backs of a lot of people in the independence movement up, and that's the Scottish media. So, have a listen to what Richard said, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end.
Okay, finally, a man who I have huge respect for. He does things in Scotland. He makes things happen. He was a brilliant. He was there at the start of the Sunday Herald and took it to even greater heights when he was there. He seized the moment and started the National, totally going against the commercial and cultural trends of newspaper buying. So we now have one extra newspaper in Scotland. Again, we're exceptional in many ways, but that's sort of a sign of it. And if anybody can give us insights about how to deal with lunchtime booze and his various strategies, it is this man. It's Richard Walker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Friends, I'm calling you that at the beginning of the speech. But I'm not sure it's going to be accurate at the end, because talking about the media is always a poison chalice, particularly to a room full of yes activists. Actually, when I started this speech, and there is at least a part of it being a plea for understanding of poor, misunderstood journalists under attack from all sides, implying an essentially noble trade. That defence isn't needed now, thanks to Donald Trump and Meryl Streep, who have combined somehow to make journalists the hero of the hour. Proof for some of you, I guess, that not only do we live in a post-truth age, we live in a post-sanity one as well. Trump's astonishing attack on a reporter sparked Meryl Streep's robust and inspirational defence of journalism, and suddenly the press stands for truth and justice. W, T, and indeed F. But those of us of a progressive mindset should be standing shoulder to shoulder with what Meryl Streep described as the principled press against the bullying and intimidation of a president-elect who has to pay people to cheer at his press conferences to disguise the fact that he's talking evil claptrap. Let's remember the brave journalism which has played a crucial role in supporting mass movements and in particular independence movements all over the world. During India's War of Independence in 1857, in Catalonia, where although the Spanish media is largely resistant to Catalonian independence, within Catalonia itself there are many newspapers, including La Vanguardia and Ara, who support it. Other independence movements in Europe and beyond have gained support from different media organisations and platforms. But not here, not in Scotland, where, until the Sunday Herald came out in favour of a yes vote in 2014, not one Scottish newspaper supported the principle of independence. And here, where 2 years after the National launched, it remains the only daily newspaper to back independence. All the others have either been on the fence or opposed to it, and expressed that view on a sliding scale of vitriol. And no prizes for guessing which are the upper end of that scale. Journalists are viewed with varying degrees of hostility by many members of those within the Yes movement. They're accused of bias, of failing to rigorously challenge the crazy scare stories of Better Together's Project Fear, of being either poisonous or useless, or, if they work for the BBC, even worse. Journalists might be highly regarded by Meryl Streep. They might be respected by independence supporters in Spain and India and Catalonia and Quebec. But to say they've never been seen as heroes by Scotland's Yes movement would be something of an understatement. So why is Scotland so different from other countries in the world? To be honest, it would take a great deal of time that we don't have to discuss exactly those reasons and to list them all. But let's say one thing. It can't be because of that we believe Scotland stands at least the equal of any nation in the world in every field of endeavour apart from journalism. That just doesn't make sense. Now, I'm one of the first to admit that the attitude of much of the Scottish media and the coverage of independence in 2014 really pissed me off. At one stage, I vowed I would not be held responsible for my actions. If one more media commentator had described the National as McPravda, if one more hack had suggested that support for independence somehow tainted the noble art of journalism, whereas opposition to it was a sign of principled bravery. But the truth of the matter is that Scotland has some excellent journalists. Some of them support independence, some of them don't. Some of them are open to persuasion. Call me stupid, but I suggest that we try to persuade them. Not just persuade them that independence is the right future for Scotland, which it is, but persuade them that support for independence doesn't undermine the practice of journalism. Just like it didn't undermine the practice of journalism in Catalonia, it doesn't in Quebec, it didn't in India. We need to adopt a new approach to journalists, particularly those we disagree with. I can stand here today and list a litany of their so-called sins. And some of you would cheer and we'd all feel self-righteous. But I've been asked today to speak today on what we can do about the media and when the starting whistle is blown in India F2. That assumes a number of things. Certainly assumes that we actually want to do something about the media. That in this age of multiple platforms, of blogs and websites and social media, that having a fair representation of the case for independence in mainstream media can actually change minds. And secondly, it assumes that there's something that was wrong with the mainstream media is capable of being fixed. So although I think there were some serious failings in the referendum coverage by some newspapers and by the BBC in the run-up to September 2014, it's not really going to help matters to pick over those issues again and again. If we want those journalists to change their attitude to us, then we have to change our attitude to them. That ball is in our court. It seems to me that we've got a choice. We can denounce individual journalists for perceived failings. We can demand that they're sacked. We can rejoice in the travails of a Scottish media facing unprecedented upheaval and financial pressures. And don't underestimate those problems for the media. Their staffing has been slashed, resources are cut. I'm not expecting you to shed any tears for this, but it's a hard life in the Scottish media currently. But if we continue to berate them, what we will do will be alienate the vast majority of Scottish reporters and pretty much guarantee that the next independence referendum will be beset by the same media problems as the last one. Alternatively, we can move on from the problems of 2014 and attempt to negotiate a new relationship with what Meryl Streep called the principled press. Even I'm not so blinkered to the media's feelings as to think that the phrase principled press applies to all newspapers in Scotland. But there are some newspapers and some journalists who will never be fair or balanced, who will never see independence as anything other than a disaster waiting to happen, or to see their job as to stop it. Stuart mentioned getting on the front foot with the media. He's right. One of the problems we found in the coverage of the independence referendum in 2014 was that Better Together were very often able to seize the agenda with, admittedly, crazy stories with Project Fear. But to try and counter them was difficult, and yes, Scotland sometimes didn't proactively answer them and proactively set the agenda. There are journalists now who are trying to define what balance means in an independence referendum and how to differentiate facts from wild opinions and propaganda, how to be fair. If the run-up to independence Indy Ref 2 is about building bridges, and it should be, let's build bridges with journalists. I've seen reporters move from being generally supportive of the Yes campaign to hostility because they feel continually under fire from a minority of independent supporters on social media for whom any criticism of the SNP or pro-Indy arguments is simply not acceptable. Now, we owe a huge debt to the SNP. We would never be where we are today without the SNP. We would never be anywhere near getting the independence. If we achieve independence, and I believe we will, it will be largely down to their efforts. But a position where the SNP is beyond criticism in the media is not compatible with how we would define journalism. So yes, we have to call out inaccurate reports in the media. Yes, we have to draw attention to misinformation, and yes, we have to counter misleading half-truths with the full facts. We have to do so with respect and without ever resorting to personal abuse. That's not just to be nice, it's to be smart. If you want to change behaviour and change relationships and change minds, you have to change the way we react to journalism. If the next independence campaign is all about changing no supporters to yes, and it is, in media terms, it's about changing hostile, suspicious journalists into ones who are prepared or even want to give the case for independence a fair crack of the whip. And fair means acknowledging that the journalist's role of holding power to account means, in Scotland, holding the SNP to account. They are in a strange position of being a party working to achieve radical anti-establishment change for the country, while at the same time running Scotland to a large extent. So let's stop berating journalists, whether in print, radio or television, for tough questioning of government ministers. That's their job. Honestly, SNP ministers are strong enough to handle it. Criticising journalists who adopt a robust approach to interviewing politicians makes us look weak and short of confidence. We have an undeniable case for independence. We have the arguments to carry the day. We don't need a supine, compliant media to convince people of the merits of a case which will withstand the most rigorous questioning. Just bring it on. If holding people to account sometimes means stupid stories about non-existent so-called scandals, that's the price of being in power. It's still a price worth paying. Now, I'd love to promise that adopting a warmer, less strident approach to even those journalists seeming determined to portray the SNP as only slightly more acceptable than Pol Pot, I can't promise that attitude will change. In the words of a 21st century prophet, haters got to hate, hate, hate. Being pleasant and respectful won't guarantee that we'll be creating an improved relationship and better, more supportive coverage. But remaining hostile will guarantee that we won't. Let's face it, anything that wins converts to the yes argument is worth it. Mainstream media still matters, even in an age of pro-indie bloggers and websites and social media. It matters because it's a way of reaching those not already on side. It matters because it still, to a large extent, dictates the agenda on TV and radio. It's a way of changing minds, of changing allegiances. I'm still not sure why there's only one Scottish Sunday newspaper and only one daily Scottish newspaper which support independence. When the Sunday Herald came out in favour of the yes vote in 2014, and when the National launched after the referendum itself later that year, both papers were overwhelmed by the support and affection expressed on social media and in many phone calls to our offices by yes members. I mean, still in the National, in the afternoon, the phone can ring at a random time, we'll pick up the phone, and people will just be phoning us to thank us for existing. I've worked in very many papers, you've got to trust me. That does not happen in any other newspaper I've ever worked for. So I know I speak for many of those who still work on those newspapers.